But once you get these droughts, you overlap a few other crop failures, you get the famines, and this is the thing, you're going to get the social unrest that accompanies it, that blue line. And again, you got the giant spike for the locusts on the green, but the blue line is a small amount of civil unrest based on the famines and the drought. They coincide. But again, the largest spike on this chart that's so many orders of magnitude above anything else that really shattered China for a period was that 1870s mega drought, the 1876 mega drought. And how do I even begin today? Have you heard it's hot? It's the hottest year ever. It's never been this hot in human history. The planet is melting. We're in a fireball Earth. Did you not know that? At least that's the way that the media would portray it, and different governmental agencies, the IPCC, and everything that sweeps under its rug for pushing agendas to bring us back to serfdom. And I do mean that in all honesty, bring us back to serfdom. Limited energy, limited comfort, limited food choices, limited mobility in terms of God-given rights of free travel. These are what are being taken away in a unified fashion and a narrative with a plan behind it. But it's all predicated and based on rising global temperatures. Well, there's a problem with this right now, because if you go to version 6 of University of Alabama, Huntsville, this is Dr. Roy Spencer's data sets here. 43 years of what we're looking at, 1979 satellite data to present, 0.36. And they're telling us we have to limit our lifestyles, cut back on everything that we've ever done, and basically living in caves using candles for heat. Oh wait, that's too much CO2, because they're limited below 1.5 C. That's the benchmark for 2050 at this net zero goal. But as we see here, 0.36. So if I'm doing the calculations on a linear where it stays now, by the time we reach 2050 and another 30 years from now, we might be scratching half a degree. That's still 3x lower than what their limitations were for net zero. And this is one of the best charts I've found in quite some time here on the proposed plan of where we are now and where they want to take us to. So if you know what the end goal is, you can actually see step by step markers in time of what's happening, and then validate this is a plan to take us there. There's nothing organic in the world that we're seeing right now. It's all a step-by-step reduction in everything, including supply chains. Closure of factories, closure of all small mom-and-pop businesses so only corporate entities operate. Then they can control by mandate what you can do or what you cannot do. So it's a coordinated effort. As there was lockstep with the coronavirus measures and lockdowns, etc., it's lockstep with this net zero scenario also. And what's scary for me is that dotted line starts at 2019, right when the vid came in to start limiting everything, locking things down, and it was the beginning starting gun for what we're seeing in the world now. And it's going to continue from here. If you look at this chart, it's going to continue straight down. So I'd ask you, has your lifestyle been limited or some change because of what has gone on in the last 3 years?
Steve Forbes warns a big financial crisis incoming. Meanwhile, the Fed raised rates again with the single biggest rate hike in 4 decades. Economists are forecasting that the Fed will panic and pivot, and they're going to start cutting rates again in 2023. Gold's going to soar. That's why Wells Fargo, Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs all forecast gold well above $2,000 an ounce. Ask yourself, do you really think big government's going to stop spending and the Fed's going to stop printing money? Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel when you call. They're going to give you some great service. Patriot Gold Group has a no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver, and you may qualify for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020, to get your free investor guide today. And with the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated IRA gold dealer for 6 years in a row, Be good to talk to them. 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
This IPCC 1.5C median is never going to be reached. We're never going to accelerate to the 1.5C. So what happens when the temperatures don't match anymore? Well, they're going to play the drought card. See, they're going to have to shift somehow. Greenland ice is above the 30-year average at the moment. It didn't melt as much. It stayed above, during the entire melt season, above the 30-year average. So you never didn't hear about Greenland too often. There was one spike where there was a little bit of melting. It ran the front pages. But how often did you hear about Greenland this year? You should ask yourself. You didn't, because it's gaining ice and it's holding above the 30-year average. So they're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Doesn't fit the narrative to restrict your lifestyle and push this move to serfdom and consolidation of wealth back into hands again. It's like we're reversing, and from the 1400s to now it's just a cycle. Extract wealth, build, extract again, collapse, and restructure, and then it circles again. So this drought card that's going to be played, we keep hearing about China, China, China. Indeed, there is a drought going on in China. Even in Sichuan province, they're going to close all factories for 10 days. And we're going to focus right here on the Yangtze River because supposedly it's the lowest ever. Well, the records do go back to 1865. So if we look at where it starts in Sichuan and it rolls down through the Three Gorges Dam, which you all know of, and then to our very famous city of Wuhan, and then exits out in the sea there in the Western Pacific. So this river that we keep hearing about is 6,300 miles long, and the same exact thing that's happening in Germany. They can't run the power plants. They don't have enough water. So it starts at the Tibet Plateau and then exits out over to the coast here. Now, it's important as we move forward with the geography a little bit and the times, because once you know how it's being structured to make you appear that it's the all-time record temperatures and you look further back, then okay, you can call anybody on it by using these same charts here. So I encourage everybody to back check the research. I'll put some links in that you can follow here. So Sichuan, Hubei, and Anhui, these are agricultural provinces that are being greatly affected right now. I mean greatly affected. Even though 70% of it's irrigated, I get it. But the amount of crop losses in China is staggering this year, staggering, to the point where they're going to need to import more food, and they're going to the southern hemisphere first, but as you saw in last week's program, that the southern hemisphere is not going to be producing due to too much ash from the Tonga eruption, already record cold temperatures. We're seeing total solar irradiance declines down there, also affecting what are the planting seasons. They're going to be delayed this year. So those of you who like geography, this is it here. This is more of a topographic map so we can follow the river of world-renowned drought. And also they keep throwing all these little facts inside here. The freshwater lakes, 2 of them are the lowest ever, and they're China's largest lakes. Oh, it's only the lowest since 1951. You need to go to the Chinese news to find this, because the American news is running with it as it's the lowest ever. What's that? Dongting and Piang Lake. But as we start to take a look further out at the percentages, it is a drought. Indeed it is. But is it once in a lifetime, once in 1,000 year, once in a millennia, or a multi-millennia event? No. It sits right within the averages of droughts through history in China. And I'm going to cover the United States and Europe as well. So that lake has shrunk 3/4 of its size. But with abundant rainfall, it fills. You have to realize irrigation projects have also cut off different inflows to these lakes over the last 150 years. That's the same around the world. Inflows, outflows have been manipulated through human intervention of levees, dikes, waterways, canals, etc. So digging into, if you follow the American news, you would really think over the last 3,000 years is the driest ever been in China. But South China Morning Post, thank you for putting this out, Yangtze River, the lowest since records began in 1865. Records began is the key word that you need to work around for this. This is where the manipulation is. They don't go any further back than that. But I'm going to. Now remember, 1865, the end of the Civil War here in the United States, is a key date to remember. Droughts have been throughout history. This is just mega droughts that have occurred across China since the 1600s, and more Asia that affected either India or Southeast Asia or China itself. The drought it's being experienced now is nothing like the great drought that was experienced in 1876. Far less than that. They would be begging for this drought. That's how small it is in comparison to the mega drought of 1876. And this also has cycles with it. Globally, there's cycles. And a lot of people are not talking about Wheeler's drought clock, but they should. Because as we have amplitude changes in the sun on the 11-year or 11.8-year solar cycle, solar maximum, solar minimum, and then within cycles of those, they come in 100-year bunches called the centennial minimums. 400-year cycles will bring us to grand solar minimums. And there's variances in solar activity. Well, the same would be true with drought clock. And Wheeler did an enormous amount of research on how this is a repeating pattern on either a 100-year, 170-year, or a 510-year approximate cogs in a wheel of global drought cycles mapped. He did thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed research data points. He always liked to look at where the flow of debris would be. The heavier the flood, the larger the rocks that would move. The smaller the flood, the smaller the silt would fill in. And they did a lot of core samples and figured out where huge floods had come or the periods that there was no inflow where the droughts were. Moving around the world and started to find similarities across all continents that it's on a cycle. And he mapped it out. And I encourage you to look at Dr. Wheeler's research on droughts across the planet, all 7 continents. Just like we see with solar activity. The de Vries cycle, 200-year cycle. What about the Schwab cycle or the Gleisberg cycle? And what's interesting is 2 of the Gleisberg cycles at 85 years each would match up with one of Dr. Wheeler's 170-year cycles. So if you double up some of these, you'll start to get into what Dr. Wheeler's research is that overlaps with the solar data. So the historical data, I want to dive a little deep in here because this is where you get a lot of points here. Through history, like in any culture, they're going to write down if something tumultuous happened that bent the society in terms of civil unrest, what caused it. And we go back through history. I mean, Chinese were meticulous. Talk about British being meticulous about taking records, and the Spanish with their fleets going to the New World. Oh no. Chinese put that to shame. They were so meticulous on what they had taken records for. So there's a lot of really good data left in such a recent time from 1644, which is the Qing dynasty or Qing Dai. So what we're looking at, everywhere that you see a dot on the map was an instance of a drought taking place. And I want to match an apple with an apple because we're going into 1865, exactly the same drought that was referenced as a low point on the Yangtze River since records began. So I want to go to the exact same time frame again. And if you look at the center drought on the spider diagram here, you're going to see crop failures, famines, and locusts, which they don't have at this time, but maybe in the future. And then you just start mapping out the data here, which I'm glad they've already done for me, and that's why it's a peer-reviewed research paper, which is available for anybody to look up. And IPCC, I encourage you to do that because here's the title for you. The orange arrow I included because that's the reference point of the drought referenced at the lowest point in 1865. Now, in comparison to the rest of those droughts, 1865 is very small. The granddaddy was the very next drought, that was that mega drought in the last chart. Orders of magnitude above anything that occurred in the 1860s was 1870s. Now this really reset society. This is where the great famines came in. There was a full collapse in China of famine. I believe 20 million people starved to death during that time. Nothing with politics. This was just pure non-availability to grow food at that point. And then you can overlap some of the Opium Wars and the British intrusion into what is Hong Kong. And then that whole chapter of history starts there. But once you get these droughts, you overlap a few other crop failures, you get the famines, and this is the thing, you're going to get the social unrest that accompanies it, that blue line. And again, you got the giant spike for the locusts on the green, but the blue line is a small amount of civil unrest based on the famines and the drought. They coincide. But again, the largest spike on this chart that's so many orders of magnitude above anything else that really shattered China for a period was that 1870s mega drought, the 1876 mega drought. But I don't hear any Western media talking about this. And I'd done these forecasts back in 2017 when I was doing the Adapt 2030 channel of following China in history, progressing forecasting out where the crop losses would be first in China felt based on historical cycles. And you know where that red circle is? Around Henan and Shanxi, right in that Yangtze River Delta Basin, because they always talked about that failing first through drought, then civil unrest followed. So here's a prediction from 2017 focused in the same area. Gee, it's not a crystal ball, it's a history book. And I can't believe that more science is not talked about with this. But people need to be fed, and this is going to be the problem with our society moving forward. The amount of crop loss currently, at least acknowledged is at least 15% globally reduction this year. England's at 50%, the UK I should say. The numbers keep getting higher and higher and higher. Now, this is from the United States Department of Agriculture, which I don't know how they get away putting and publishing. This is from just yesterday when I got this report. This is the newest report here from the USDA. And look at that. They have record yield for China going up into the stratosphere here for this year's production. Yet they're having one of the largest droughts in the last century and a half. There's a disconnect here, and we're being played all the way along. This complacency thing of don't worry about it, there'll be enough food. Oh, those people like David talking with his charts and thing, oh, there's going to be enough food. Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the CBOT, they'll be able to deliver contract forward. Don't worry about it. But I just don't see how the production's coming out of China, which means, since they're the largest buyer on the planet, they're going to be coming around to look for more sources of food. And generally, they'll look at the southern hemisphere first, and they'll say, whoa, it's pretty unsettled down there with the Tonga ash eruption, the volcanic dimming that's happening. We're going to go back to the northern hemisphere and start pulling from western crops, which are being dented heavily. And, you know, they try to sell us this as the solution. And when you look at this bevy of destruction here of the natural ecosystem as the solution for fossil fuels, I just scratch my, no, they can't be. Really? This is what they want the solution to be. Now, this is barely enough to power a factory. So what do you think is going to happen? We're going to have to cover the entire planet with this. So we're just switching one system for another to enrich corporations. It's not going to work. This overlap can't work fast enough to replace anything liquid. So there's a term for this when China can't produce enough food and starvation comes in. The mandate from heaven is removed. And Emperor Xi is experiencing this at the moment, doing everything he can to stop the mandate. And when I say that, they looked at the stars in heaven as the Birkeland current coming down from the Big Dipper called the Beidou Qixing, and that's what they understood as the consciousness, or at least the flow of energies to power our star, to then allow consciousness as the human form to exist on this planet. Once that changes, and jet streams and cloud cells start to move, they understood that the current flow to the star changed. The electrical impulses changed. Electromagnetically, it changed. So when that changed, they thought that he was of God or some celestial being that could control that current flow. And if they couldn't, the mandate was removed. They no longer have authority to rule over the people. You can't even provide food for the people. You're out. And every crop forecaster that has gotten it wrong by more than 5% needs to be removed. I don't care if it's a government position. You're out of there. If you can't give reliable data where the food's coming from, and we're going into famines in some places, doubling and tripling food prices in others, scarcity, and you should no longer have a say in forecasting out. Leave it to people who actually have gotten it right. Now, if we move over, a side note here also with this fleet of ships, the fishing boats are allowed to go back out into the sea. This is a stealth fleet of China here. And when I say that, these fishing boats are going to interfere with the U.S. carrier group that's going to be rolling through there in about a week and a half. I do believe at the end of August they're sending a carrier group through the strait there. Now, conflict on military vessel to military vessel, send out 10,000 fishing vessels that are going to interfere with the movement of a carrier group, and then you just block them in there. Then it becomes a land-launching missile fest from China, if they decide to. I'm not saying they would. I'm just saying it's the only time they could box an American fleet into such a position, because in the open ocean, you know, we'd win hands down with the tech and the, you know, the training and the aircraft and these sort of things. That China would not have a chance in an open ocean setting. But locking a carrier group inside the islands with these types of vessels, which I've been told is a possibility. Stealth fleet is what they call this. and could make news in the future. 1860 seemed to be a year of drought around the planet, did it not? Because this is the cotton harvest here in the U.S. This is going to drop to the lowest since 1868 this year, right now, because of drought. American cotton harvest will be the lowest since 1868, which loops right back into Dr. Wheeler's research that it was a global event. This is a global cycle of drought. You cannot tell me that we have 2 mega droughts in 2 different continents within 2 years of each other. Actually 3, it depends on which months you're going to base this on. So American cotton production this year is going to be scrimpy at best. It's not quality cotton this year. There's a lot of problems with it. So yeah, they might have, harvested 7 million acres, but within that, what's considered and graded as grade A quality, it's the same with the wheat. The protein content in the wheat is dramatically reduced because the growing conditions have been so atrocious